Faith and Life podcast is back.
We're in the booth again, but we're not in the booth.
Oh no, this is 3.0.
Wait, that's like another level. Like we've leveled here, and then we're like, let's level here.
That's right.
Like the only way we can level more is if we replace the host.
Which, wait a minute, that's
the hosts.
The hosts, plural.
Plural, multiple.
What are you trying to say to me,
No,
Greg?
you write my paychecks. I can't fire
true.
you.
Yeah, good point. But boy, look at this. So we've gone. This is the third season, I think. No,
I think
third
we're in
year.
I think this is technically like our fourth season, though. I don't know. We're getting a lot of episodes in.
Absolutely. So we're doing
we
great.
digress already.
Faith and Life podcast. We're going to talk about faith and life.
Where they intersect.
Yep. And we got a great topic today.
We do.
About how to hear God. We're reading a book together on our staff, watching some videos together. But before we do that, I have this deck of cards that I picked up from Orange in April of questions that are icebreaker questions.
Oh, so like,
right,
like the age-old favorites of, is a hot dog a sandwich? Those things we established, does a straw have one hole or two holes? And
by the way, I was at breakfast with my wife yesterday, and I saw a hot dog on the menu, had nothing to do with sandwiches. It was in a category of entrees.
Well, you were at a place that had hot dogs on the menu at breakfast, so that's your first problem there, Mike.
Okay.
I'm not taking that as word.
All right, that's a good point. All right, but I did not have a hot dog for breakfast. By the way,
You should have.
I had chicken and waffles.
Is hot dog a breakfast?
I have had hot dogs for breakfast. I have. Pick a card.
Ooh, it's a magic trick.
Yeah.
If I gave you $10,000, what would you spend it on?
$10,000. What would I spend it on?
Here comes the money.
Yeah. Boy, I would spend it on. I think Darcy and we would take a trip.
Okay.
To someplace we've always wanted to go.
Nice.
I think we'd go to multiple countries.
Okay.
And see people that we know in different places, and go to see different things that we know those different places. Yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Easy. I'd pay off any debt that I still had that I could. Maybe not the house and stuff like that. But then the rest would go to. I'd take the kids on a trip. But not like a bougie trip. Like enough of a trip that I could still have enough that I can make. I want to make a bookshelf that goes into my basement. I want a hidden doorway to my basement, like the 1966 Batman TV show. And I want to have it where I can lift up a William Shakespeare bust and hit a button, and the door slides open, and that's how you get into my basement, into my man cave in the basement. That's a dream. That's a dream.
It's a dream.
I don't even know if $10,000 would cover that, but
wow.
Like, how cool would that be? Like, oh, this is a really cool bookshelf. Like, oh yeah, well, don't you have a basement? I do. Let me show you William Shakespeare here. Boom.
Wow.
Money,
right?
That'd be cool.
That would be
That'd
amazing.
Be cool.
That would be. That's amazing. That's so unique. I've never heard of anybody say anything like that. That's amazing. One of the things you said about the family makes me think, for that $10,000, we would probably take our boys somewhere. Because we've talked about it, Darcy and I were like, oh man, get the five of us together. These three guys are in their 20s. We don't get a lot of time.
Do they finally get to go to Disney World?
Now that would be amazing.
That's a deep cut.
Yes.
You got to go back and listen to the previous episodes.
About the guilt and regret I feel as a dad from years and years ago.
I just bring up every
I now
podcast.
feel, but now we're right back in my guilt and regret and shame. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
That's amazing.
Speaking of guilt and shame.
Speaking of guilt and shame, how to hear God. So we've been, as a staff, this guy, Peter Greig. Peter Greig? Don't know. Greig. Hey, he wrote a book called How to Hear God, A Simple Guide for Normal People. And then on Right Now, he's got this course called the Lectio course. Yeah. And the Lectio course is a 5-session course about how to hear God from the Scriptures. It's an ancient spiritual practice. And so we've been digging into it as a staff. And I'm almost through this book. And we thought, let's have a conversation about how to hear God. Because one of the things I've learned over the course of my Christian life but also as a pastor, is how many people have said to me that they struggle with hearing from God. And it's a constant struggle that I've heard over the decades. And even myself, sometimes wondering, did I get that right? Am I hearing from God? Am I not hearing from God? Why am I not hearing from God? There have been times that I have heard from God, but that's been very clear, and so on. So this book really, I think, helps us unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
And I think moves us in that direction of tuning our ear and our heart to God speaking.
Yeah, it almost is like the whole Lectio it's a process, right? Like it's a way to study the Bible and not even study the Bible. It's a way to have a communication with God. And I've found it interesting because in staff, we've put this into practice where we're sitting there and we read the passage and we reflect on it. And we read that same passage again and we reflect on it. And then we read it again. I think we do it 4 times.
4 times.
And I don't know if I've ever read something intentionally 4 times in a row, like the focus that it takes. And the whole idea and concept of hearing from God is such an interesting thing because he even talks about early on in his book of how it's very commonplace for us as a church to say like, oh, I heard from God, God spoke to me. But like nowhere else outside of Christianity would that hold up, right? Like in a court, like, well, God told me to do this. They're like, okay, weirdo, or like any other out in public. It's a very natural setting. And so like we're taking something that is to the world is not natural or uncommon anyways, and something that's hard for us to process. And I think that then is just another layer on why it is one of the more difficult things to say, like, am I hearing God? Or is this just me saying this is what I want to hear? And kind of unpacking that.
Yeah, that's a big unpack because we get in our own echo chambers. Our social media will feed that echo chamber. The news media we watch online or on network TV will feed that echo chamber sometimes. So we'd be really careful that God is not just echoing what we want.
Right, because everything that is not to get like uber weird on you guys, but like everything, all our devices are listening to us at all times. You literally can say like, think of anything like Nathan's Hot Dogs. So we talk about hot dogs, like Nathan's Hot Dogs, Nathan's Hot Dogs, Nathan's Hot Dogs. Guess what? Sometime now on an ad on your phone is going to probably pop up for Nathan's Hot Dogs because you're listening to this on the podcast. Everything is, and so that's also where I think you have to be careful of that echo chamber that you talked about because where then years ago, we'd be like, I was just thinking about Nathan's Hot Dogs, and then all of a sudden, I saw a sign for Nathan's Hot Dogs. That's a sign from God. Well, we're not sponsored by Nathan's Hot Dogs, by the way, anyways.
Yes.
If we were, it'd be Ballparks all Frank, all beef, so.
Yeah.
But let's set that straight. But so I think that can also be a danger too, of we can get, because the people in our world, the people that we surround ourselves with, our Facebook, our social media, everything, it feeds into what we want to hear. And what we like. The videos that we click on, it reads and learns and it says, okay, and it's starting to pick up. So I think now in our day and age, it's even harder to hear from God because there's so many other voices competing for our attention.
For sure. And if it was just this spiritual exercise of like tuning our ears to this invisible voice from God, it is really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes it's possible, but if that's all there is, that would be really difficult. The beautiful thing about the scriptures is, the Bible can't listen to us like our phones can. So it's an inanimate object, and yet God can speak to us through that word from Genesis to Revelation. And it's proven to be true across the centuries. Since God's people have had the written word, God has used that written word to speak to us. And there's story after story after story, and which makes the Lectio Divina so powerful because it's a source outside ourselves that we're accessing, but God is using it to speak a word, a phrase, ask a question of us from the scriptures themselves. And it is mysterious, and it sounds mysterious, and it is. And yet it's a really powerful thing, I think.
Yeah, well, and that's the idea when you're looking at scripture so often, right? And you're looking at it in the 4 phases of, okay, the 4th time. Eventually, if you've been in the church a lot, you've heard these stories often, right? And you can hone in and tune into something, and it might be important then to say, okay, well, but maybe there's a word that's sticking out for whatever reason now that you've never noticed? And how many times does that happen, like just rereading a scripture once that you like, oh, I remember this story, like I don't remember it as much. But then like when you do it in those 4 sessions and you take the time to just reflect, and it's been a very helpful and meaningful process to me of doing the Lectio. Lectio?
Lectio.
Lectio. It's one of those fancy words, you know.
It is. And by the way, Lectio means reading, and Divina is divine, so it's divine reading. And so it's an ancient practice of approaching it, trusting that this scripture is God speaking divinely to us through the reading of this scripture. And I love it. I mean, it can be done in an individual discipline, but also in a group setting, like what our staff is doing, this Lectio Divina. And there's a beautiful synergy and also a insights that we're gaining from each other, from what everybody else is picking up from this piece of scripture that we're reading that's different than me, you know? And we learn from each other that way too.
Yeah, it's another layer, right? Like it's another layer of the way to hear God's voice. If you're in tune with the scripture, right? If you're reading the scriptures and being focused in on it, to then have other people as well who are in tune and hearing, it's another avenue for hearing God, I think, through others and through this too.
Yeah. And now Pete, I'm not going to say his last name because I was just going to call him Pete.
Pete G.
Pete G, who wrote this book, talks about like there's criteria, like how to discern if this was God's voice. He called them the ABCs. But what I liked about that was it does take us out of the echo chamber, out of our own like selfish desires to say, does this criteria, if we put this criteria on what we think we just heard, does it feel like this is faithful, that we should follow through on, whether it be individually or as a group as well. He also does point out there's a guy named Brother Lawrence, an ancient monk that wrote persuasively about hearing God in the ordinariness of life. You know, Brother Lawrence has this famous thing about he's washing dishes in a monastery. This was like the 15th century. And recognizing that God can even interact with him as he's washing dishes. You know, so the ordinary things of life, God can speak to us in those places. And sometimes Pete points out that we expect God to show up in the earthquake or the big thing or the whatever, this dramatic thing that God's gonna like come down. This is what I want you to do. And Pete's like, no, like Brother Lawrence said, sometimes it's in these small, ordinary things that God speaks, which is consistent with who God is in the incarnation.
Yeah, it's something I feel like we've mentioned before on the show of, we call it like campfire moments, right?
Yeah.
It's if you're on a trip with friends, like, yeah, you have these things that you plan to do, right? These big, like, this is what we're going to remember the trip for, of like doing the whitewater rafting, doing those. And those moments and experiences are good. But sometimes what's just as good is hearing the conversations around the campfire as you're unpacking your day, living life, being able to be real. And I think those are those special moments that's the ordinary, right? That's hearing God in the ordinary. And I think very oftentimes we look for God in the roller coaster high moments, right? Like the peaks, and we sometimes forget to say, well, you know, God speaks in the silence, right? Like he doesn't come in, you know, in the wind and the earthquakes, like you said, he's in the still quiet.
Yeah, and he points out that how Jesus remains in the road to Emmaus. The risen Jesus is walking with 2 disciples as they're leaving the day of the crucifixion. Jesus is alive, and yet he is in disguise. Yeah. They can't recognize him. And it was almost purposeful in the way the story is told in Luke, that Jesus is purposely remaining incognito. Yeah. And yet the whole time they're talking to God, and how much sometimes that happens to us, that we think we're missing God's voice, and yet God might be speaking to us the entire time. We're just not seeing it for what it is, for one reason or the other, until eventually we look back and go, oh my gosh, like the disciples, they go, our hearts were burning within us. Yeah. In other words, Jesus was walking with us, and we didn't even know it until we stopped to think about it.
Yeah.
Powerful.
That's good stuff.
Powerful stuff. So this is a really important topic, not just because people have struggled with it, I've struggled with it over the decades, but it's going to be in our world as followers of Jesus forever.
Yeah.
And he points out that, look, because we're not following a dead deity, following Jesus is following the risen Jesus and living the living God who still speaks. Now it's just us tuning our voice to the voice of the shepherd. So good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that's very practical.
Yep.
And I would encourage if you're like me, because we've had these conversations where like I struggle to hear God's voice. Like I don't know if I can actually say I've ever heard an audible voice, right? Like, and I've heard God in moments and things like this, but like this has been a really helpful process. So use the Right Now Media, go through that video series. They're like 12-minute videos, and there's like 5 of them. Yep. And it is super helpful to just get to kind of how do I shape my time with my communication with God, right? Because it's hearing it, and we need to be able to listen too, as well as speak and have those conversations with God. And I think the Lectio Divina is really a powerful way to kind of process that. So you can go to our website, click on the Right Now stuff, and sign in. And if you are technologically impaired and you have issues with it, reach out to me or Mike. We can help get you connected and find those videos for you.
And the connection to Right Now through St. Luke is a gift. Like literally, it's a gift. It's free.
Yeah.
So without being connected to a church, you have to pay for that membership. But if you just go to our website, stlukeColumbus.com, go to Right Now Media, and you can set up an account for free through us as our gift to you. So really, really great stuff.
And I think I would be encouraged to hear what people's responses of going through that process. Because for me, it's been a very helpful thing that I've started to try to implement into my daily walk. So.
Yep. And if you want to pick up this book, it's How to Hear from God, a Simple Guide for Normal People by Pete.
Pete who?
Greig. I'm going to say Greig. Pete Greig. Yeah, but John Mark Comer says it's the best book I've ever read on the most important thing you will ever do.
So good.
So good. Yeah. So there's the book. Hey, man. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.